Hi, welcome to this Open Security Summit session in March 2022. This is the CISO Roundtable. This is where we get a number of CISOs answering questions that some of them submitted by the community, others that we're going to talk about each other, but it's all about collaborating and sharing the knowledge and seeing what challenges we have, and then, learn from each other. So I'm Dinis Cruz. I'm the CISO and CTO of a company called Glasswall. I've been doing security for quite a long time. Actually, it's interesting in my role because Glasswall is a smaller company. I can actually do both roles, and it's very interesting to be driving a lot of security through engineering and have security have a massive voice in engineering and driving a lot of changes that in the past I struggled to make scale, and now we really embedding a lot of practices in what we do, also the point where we present to customers and they're quite impressed when we actually show what we're doing. Marius.
Hello there, I'm Marius. I'm currently based in Essex, near London. So I don't know where the crazy is, Essex. So I'm the CISO of a company called Job and Talent. I've been there just over 2 weeks. Previous to that, I was at Zava for a year and a half. And then previous to that, I was at Just Eat for a number of years. I come from a technical background and transition to more business orientated. And I think a balance of the two is what I place myself at. And I'm really looking forward to the great discussions we're going to have.
Chase.
Hi everyone, my name is Chase. I am the Cybersecurity Director of Cybertech Analytics. I also am a government contractor here over in the US, help out local governments, usually smaller ones, and law enforcement agencies. Kind of have a unique perspective. I've been in both law enforcement and cybersecurity, so I've actually investigated the cyber criminals, and I've also tried to protect the system. So it gives me a little key insight into what to look for and probably how to best do it based off incident response. I'd like to talk about just kind of the prevention behind it and building a cybersecurity culture, which I think is the best form of prevention.
Sheetal?
So hi, I'm Sheetal. I'm working as a Chief Information Security Officer for Finoa, a crypto custodian company based in Berlin, Germany. I have around 20 years of experience in security. I think I might be older than all of you, no. But yeah, I've worked both in startups as well as really large companies. I've also had a company of my own. I'm very excited to be here to answer any questions you may have. I'm also quite interested in the topic of security incident management. And as you rightly said, Chase, I think if you focus on incident management well, you will slowly get to patch up the entire security aspects of the company. So that's also a topic of interest for me.
Cool. Mr. Nick?
Hi, my name is Nick. I'm actually based in Boise, Idaho, so I'm quite far from most of you so far that have been presenting. My background is in being a CISO in financial services and healthcare for the past 15 years. And I actually left that post a couple of years ago to start my own consultancy, which is how I've met Dinis and Glasswall. And we work mostly on security strategy outsourced like vCISO duties, as well as a little bit of pen testing. And I'm interested in the incident management that you mentioned. Also interested if we can get there to talk a little bit about the lack of knowledge on some of the cloud products that we run into a lot. So we see a lot of knowledge gap in some of the Kubernetes environments and some of the newer technologies that are deployed widely in software design firms. So I see a lot of system administration issues and configuration management issues really on that side.
And last but not least.
Thank you. Yeah, so my name is Ante, for those that don't know me. Currently CISO at SumUp. SumUp is basically a global payments company, right? So similar to kind of iZettle and Square, what Square does in the US, SumUp does basically the rest of the world. So I've been there a year and a half roughly now, and before that I was a CISO at Skyscanner, and before that e-commerce and kind of fintech, back in fintech. Roughly 20 years experience in the industry. Which are the topics of interest? I mean, anything. There's so much going on, right? I don't, culture is always a thing, right? And kind of driving cultural transformations. Another one I would really like to touch on is the just future of ProdSec/AppSec, right? Where do we see things going? How things are kind of evolving. Shifting left was a big thing. Is it still a big thing? Where do we see all that kind of in 3 to 5 years? I would be really interested to hear what people think in that sense.
Yeah, I think I agree with you there, Ante. Really, product security is something that got a lot of attention a few years back, and I also see a lot of progress in that area. But I'm just curious to see what you guys have to share about how you organize it in your own companies and how successful it is, what kind of roadblocks you face. That would be a very interesting conversation.
Okay, well, we can start there, right? I think why don't we start on that topic of how we do product development, we do sort of the AppSec, the injecting of practices, and maybe we could start with threat modeling, because I think that's and static code, let's say static code analysis. So if you pick those two topics, what's kind of your experience, where it worked well, where it didn't work? So the ability to use threat modeling to create architecture diagrams, to get the teams to maybe even create themselves, so use that to review them, and then use automated tools that you can put in a pipeline to give you feedback loops. So Marius, Chase, who wants to pick that up first?
Reluctance there, so I'll go first. I come from an environment, I worked in an environment that didn't have architectural diagrams. Product security didn't exist, and it was hard to get that concept of building security in the actual product at the beginning of the life cycle rather than post-production, right? So me and the team pushed for threat modeling, and from threat modeling, we create the diagrams for the architecture that basically helps us document what should be already there, but isn't. So we are driving that, and I find myself in a position with security to actually drive a lot of processes. We're actually in the middle of a lot of processes, and especially when it comes to product security, that we can inject ourselves. Now, the biggest problem then we spoke about is the actual culture. It's actually the adoption of that, changing the mindset of thinking while we're doing security at the beginning versus the aftermaths. We all okay with pen testing. I think pen testing has been in the industry for a few years now, that every team is quite confident of having the penetration testing organized. But not a lot of people have the concepts of doing security at the earlier stages. When we work in an agile environment, you don't even have architectural teams most of the time. So it's hard to inject yourself in the architecture or the design phase because that doesn't exist. So code gets shipped every day. So where do you inject yourself? That shift left terminology that we use, where is that left? That's the distinction I'm having trouble understanding now, because shifting left means that you know where you are and you're going to go to the left side, right? We have code everywhere. We have processes that each individual teams are able to do their own thing. So the company I work now has 6 companies globally and acquisitions of 30 different companies with developers that all run their own development process. So injecting myself in the pipeline, it's which pipeline? So it goes back to that culture and giving the actual processes the injection rather than the pipeline. I want to inject myself in the process of development and not just in the pipeline of development. I don't know what anyone else has to add on that, but my biggest problem now is actually understanding where that shift left is.
Yeah, you're very right about that. I also start always with the process. So you have to introduce that process to the team. You have to take it from a top-down level, right? You need to make them understand that products need to have security in mind right from the ideation phase. And then when you come to architecture, this is where we need to do the threat modeling. take them. So for instance, even at Finoa, of course, the product was definitely built with security in mind, and it's really excellent. But in the future, when we add on to it, right, how can we ensure that whatever we ship is secured by default? And the only way possible, only way that is basically possible is that we make sure that the product owner will not get away with just going ahead with the idea, passing it on to the designer goes to the architect goes to the developers, and it's all shipped. We have to make sure that the product owner understands that the process is very strict. You have to have the security go ahead at each stage. And well, what I also try to do is initially, of course, it takes a lot of effort, right? It takes time. People are getting angry with us because we slow them down. But the end game is, I always see it as, a year from now, 2 years from now, it will become a much more easier process, because we will slowly start training the developers in threat modeling concepts, how we see security when we look at an architecture, and then we slowly hand over to them over a period of time and ask them to make sure they do the threat modeling, they submit just the model to us so that we have a quick review, and make it simpler and don't take so much of time as well.
Yeah, I think that with the SDLC discussion and kind of shifting left, I think documenting that process, even if it's super high level and there are 30 teams involved, is really the first step that I always try to approach it with. If we can document it and show that, vaguely, I know it's different team to team, but let's say generally speaking, there's 7 steps in this SDLC, even if it's agile and we're in different phases of those steps throughout the progress. If we can see that flow chart, and then also, injecting security champions into those teams is kind of the second area that I've had good luck with. If you can get stakeholders at that level on the actual development teams, and then they're working towards, even if it's high level, again, common workflow, requirements for software come in through one channel, they're stored in one channel, start on the far left. And then for people who are not interested in the security side, maybe the opposite of a security champion, trying to sell a bit of the benefits of that, right? I mean, how much does it cost in time to rework code when we find these vulnerabilities, months after the code has been shipped to a customer? There's reputational issues, there's all kinds of pieces that come into play. Whereas if we could catch the issues further to the left, they are prevented from being issues that are shipped to a customer, or maybe even issues that make it to QA or anything else. So I always find just documenting, where we are today, and then trying to inject a bit into those processes, secure, tooling, and then people as well in those teams is really the kind of the big areas that I've seen success with agile and lots of fast moving, CI/CD type pipelines.
Jason, any comments from your side, or?
Yes.
All right.
So I like what Nick said about kind of, you have to involve the team. And I think giving everyone ownership of these projects from the beginning is critical. And it's the same thing when you're trying to establish your culture. From day one, you have to make security a priority. And whether that's talking about it, just communicating properly, I don't do a lot of AppSec, but I find communication in these projects or any IT project is critical, because you have a source of knowing that security is a vital role in this project, but people don't always know the exact reasoning behind it. So making sure to communicate that message to the rest of the team about why this is exactly important, why we need to care about it, and establishing that ownership you're giving to the team members goes a far way. Because it's the same, you don't want to be 6 months into the project and then you don't have someone on the same page and something happens once, like Nick said, you release it to the customer, because you do face those reputational damages. And at that point, it's really hard to recover. So taking it from the very beginning, step one, knowing that it takes time to build anything that's going to be successful, and communicating that to your entire team, making sure you have those security representatives on board. Nick coined it security champions, but whoever in your organization that you think is that person, make sure they are involved from the initial talks to the planning, to the architecture, to the finalization of that product. Because like we all know, there's many fields in IT to specialize. Not everyone's an expert in security. So just make sure to communicate that message to all layers of your team. And I think in the end game, that will make it the most successful.
Yeah, can I just add something? That's as much as a cultural problem as it is a process and technology problem, like what people mention, right? And I think there's a tricky thing there where you cannot fix a culture with process, and you cannot fix a process with technology. Like these people, these kind of things don't correlate, right? So you can fix culture with the culture, and you can fix process with the process. So I don't know. For me, always the biggest challenge in all of this is scale, right? You can always do amazing things at small scale, but when you need to scale exponentially, that's where you hit roadblocks, right? And that's where you need to innovate, use different approaches, I don't know, gamify, scale champions to that extent where you can actually see the value then over time. But each culture is different, each company is a living organism, right? And it changes over time. So I think that one thing I've learned is that you just need to be open to experimentation and like, don't get demotivated by trying, right? I try one approach and then if it doesn't work, try something else. An example, at SumUp, we have, I don't know, 30, 40 tribes, right? And they're fully autonomous compared to Skyscanner, where level of autonomy was kind of a different scale, right? So at least you would have agreed engineering principles, or you would have agreed certain things to a certain threshold. But you hear an example, it's a much higher level of autonomy, right? So it's literally having different microcultures. So how do you actually scale that where you have completely different stacks, completely different technology, completely different culture? As a tribe in Brazil versus a tribe in Sofia versus a tribe in the US that do completely different things. One does banking, the other one does lending, third one does payments, and they have completely different. So it's about, right, picking up learnings, but experimenting different things and trying. But there's no silver bullet, right? At least I've learned that. So you need to try different things until you find what works. And then, but one thing that does always work for sure, it's not the process, because with the process, as I said, you can't fix the culture. It's the success stories, right? So you can build a success on a small scale and then propagate that success, right? And that's where knowledge sharing and these kind of more formal sessions really help. Guilds, champions, chapters, whatever we want to call them, where you can actually then promote those success stories. But if you don't, if you don't have those channels, then yeah, I guess it's very difficult. And only then you're gonna hit technological and process roadblocks, right? Over time. How do you keep threat models up to date? Who does it? People do it. Champions do it. Is there any value in them in the first place, right? So it's that continuous kind of questioning of status quo, trying to figure out how do you kind of do that waste reduction on a continuous basis and stay as lean as possible so you can scale, but at the same time you can cover everything from a security perspective. I don't know.
That quote is great, man. That quote is great. What always work is success stories. I think that's an awesome quote. I have to say, and I do remember, I think we're speaking when you were Skyscanner at the time, I do remember you saying, well, these guys have too much autonomy. I guess it all depends on, scale, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
But so, yeah, as long as you agree across the organization what autonomy means, I think it's already a big step forward, right?
Yeah.
But if autonomy for me means different things to what it means for you, then we have an issue, right?
Yeah. So when I just would like us to explore a bit, and I go back to Mario's, your comment, which is when you talk about the teams don't have architecture, right? And actually, your other quote I really like is "Where's left?" I think that's a really great comment. Right? Where is it? But because what I think these days is that in order to change security, in order to be really impactful, there's a moment where you have to realize that we have to also change how certain things work. And yes, it's not necessarily that we need to change the culture or to change a lot of the ways that the companies operate. But for example, documentation and good reference architectures and threat models is not just security that needs them. Right? In fact, I challenge you to talk to any developer that is in the middle of those teams, especially, for example, a new developer, but even not just that, somebody who's been there for a while. and ask them, do you really like the fact that there's no documentation? Do you really like the fact that you don't have this in architecture diagrams? And every time you have to ask how this thing works, you go and you start drawing on the board, right? So I actually think, and this is my question to you, I think there's a very sweet spot that security can start to go to the business and say, look, we'll buy that fight. Because security is almost the first responder, because when there's an incident, the first questions we ask is, how does this thing work? And where's the data, and where's the connection, and all that stuff. So I think that we are motivated to understand how things work in a more raw, more sort of native way than sometimes developer teams who are promoted and motivated for the fact that it works. It's not how it works, it's more like it works. So what do you think of this idea that we can elevate the security practice and go to the business and say, look, we'll take on a responsibility, and you fund it in different ways, and security champions can be one of the ones who do it, but we need good documentation. We need good, architectural diagrams, and we're not the only ones who need it. The business also needs it.
So that's the, like you said, the sweet spot, right? And that's the thing that I'm trying to do, promote the security as providing the solution for documentation. But at the same time, it's a vicious circle that gets back to the same point. For you to create the threat model, to create the documentation that is necessary, you need the engineering time. The engineering time is a resource that at the moment is scarce. Everyone's running to develop agilely, let's put it that way, which means that they don't have time for hygiene stuff. Every developer, like you said, wants documentation, wants to go back and look at technical debt, but they don't have the time. So going back to the business and asking for that scale, it's always a tricky thing, because how do you prioritize the actual velocity of development and the engineering and that is required to basically create that documentation?
But what about if security hires and funds that extra individual that is part of that team that is allocated to security? But and I think that you touch a very key point, which is, if we go to a team and saying, can I take 10% or 50% of your time to do this? They're going to say no. It's like, well, it's a massive thing. But if you say, hey, I'm going to give you resources to do this, which you need to, but I'll help and I'll fund, or I'll make the business case and I'll do it globally. What about doing it like that?
So that's exactly what we're trying to do with the security champions. So we allocate them. Okay, it's not an additional resource from our side. It's security champions that we're trying to give the actual role and responsibility. But again, with that actual documentation to begin with, the knowledge is shared with one or two individuals. And for you to actually get that knowledge from that one or two individuals, it's their time and resources, right? We have one individual that knows authentication and is the only one that knows the authentication. You still need his resources, his time, his 10% time to be able to create that documentation. So we are using security to drive that and get that 10% time, but we're still hitting a bottleneck of the engineering time, because when you go from a non-mature environment in security, and I think that it's good to distinguish a mature environment from some greenfield environment that all the processes, all the product is in place, and you're coming in later on and trying to figure out what's bolted together. We still haven't figured out how to solve that translation between that. What I'm trying to push as well in my new company is hiring developers that have security minded, that can create that documentation for me when they first join the company. So when they get hired, as part of the induction, it's to create that documentation, it's to create the threat model for the area that they get hired. That way, they're helping me, but at the same time, they're gaining the knowledge of the system.
Yep.
And they can become a security champion as well if they're good at it.
That's a very good point, and I think that's really that would really help. That's a good input. I think we should all try that. One point I would like to raise is, what has helped me, I have noticed, is really doing this risk assessment. So it's, of course, a massive threat modeling exercise in tech that we would do each product area, each tech area, and try to understand what impacts and what's most painful to the business, what has like the most important asset, and then you can kind of prioritize and put a value behind each of those risks that you've identified. And when you then present it to the management saying, okay, this is our tech stack, and this is the entire tech organization, the product that we have. This is the result of the risk assessment or the threat modeling sessions that I've conducted over all of these aspects. And this is the prioritization I give to each of these risks. So ultimately we have these many high risks, these many medium, and these many low. And I would like to understand from management how important security is to ensure. So when it's presented as a risk to the business, of course, it changes the game, because then compliance comes into play, and you have, of course, regulations that you have to take care of, and then you have a lot of management support into reducing those risks. And then when you speak to the product manager about injecting security into the product lifecycle, at this spot in the ideation, that's where I want to enter. At this spot, we want to have this in place. It makes it a little simpler for me. So that's a trick I've used in the past. I hope it works with you guys as well.
Yeah, I do the exact same thing with the risk assessment approach, because the issues like Marios is pointing out, there's security issues, but there's also operational issues there, right? Like if you don't have good cross training or succession planning, if only one person knows, I think the authentication you were speaking to, if only one person knows how that works in a product, and they leave or they get an awesome job offer and they go consider it, you have issues beyond just the documentation. Now you don't have that knowledge transfer, you're missing a piece, you have to go back and figure it out. And what's the cost to do that? All of this is really dollars and cents. And if you do it after the fact, like the further right in the SDLC, if the imaginary SDLC we're all discussing, the further right that you tackle these issues, the more they cost to tackle, like, financially. So you can put that, and I do the same thing with risk assessment, because those are really, there's 4 or 5 risks, I think, in that the comments that Marios was making about having trouble finding the resource or the right resource to document. And then, the documentation piece, if you don't have that, it's really hard to have intelligent discussions about the process that we talked about too, because we don't all agree on what the process looks like if we don't have that documentation, so it's really hard if you don't start with, capturing what's really happening today. I do a lot of compliance work, so it's probably kind of built into me, but, document what we're doing, make sure it's accurate, and then just go from there. I think that's really the best approach if you can get that. I mean, it sounds like there's a lot going on in your organization, Marios, with a lot of mergers and acquisitions. And I know that's definitely difficult. I've been through that in a previous life, and it's hard. We used to acquire 15 companies a year, and it's really hard to get all of that information transferred. But I think, just using the risk assessment approach and then accurate documentation on what the current process is at some level that we can all agree upon. This is the state of affairs.
Can I take the conversation on a tangent then on the risk side of things?
Yes.
Because when we're speaking about risk to the business, we are very used to say high, medium, low. What's the impact? When you have thousands of risks like that, it's very hard to prioritize. How do we show impact as money? Because business is there to drive revenue. Business is there to expand markets. How do we translate those risks into those actual areas so the business can prioritize based on those? Because that's where, as an industry, we're really struggling, I think, translating that as a monetary value to the business. I go to the board, I will present them 10 high risks. It's very hard for me to translate that into something that the board will understand. Yeah. So do we have any techniques? From my side, there's a lot of different methods. I translate that into value, but not very accurate and very subjective. Objective.
I can give an input there. So what I do is I always base it on the asset. So for instance, whenever I'm even reviewing any product in tech, I first want to understand what's your most important asset. And then I try to understand what is the value of that asset to the company. And based on that value, so now if say that, say for instance, it's your laptop, okay? And then what's the value in terms of confidentiality, integrity, availability of this asset? And you put a value to that. If that asset value is high, then whatever you say the threat or the vulnerability value is, it always multiplied to a high value. And of course, when you present it to the business, when you tie, of course, with respect to risk, you also have to look at the financial aspects in risk. So when you say that this is the product value, this is the asset value, and this is how we see the risk, and this is the amount. So then you would be able to tie it down also the financial value that the risk officer has given you, and that's where it hurts the team. So that's
the problem I see with that approach is that it's very limited to the actual value and the actual potential impact, right?
Mm-hmm.
There's no actual facts behind it. So when you go to the board and you say, we have this exposure, this is our risk, this is the value of the asset versus the exposure factor. So if we get breached, this is how much it's going to cost us. Let's take the argument of everyone that used it over the last few years, GDPR. So this, the financial cost that it's going to cost us, we don't have any evidence of actual loss of value there, right? So I can go to the business and say, this is going to cost you 3 million, when they're going to say to me, we've been operating for 10 years and it hasn't impacted us. What's the actual possibility of us getting that fine? Okay. We have no data. As security industry, we have no data. There's no database that we can go and query and say, what's the actual possibility of that? It's a number that we pluck out the air in most instances. So the biggest struggle I have is actually going to the board and saying, okay, this is the actual asset value. Mm-hmm. This is what us getting breach on that risk it means to the business. Mm-hmm. But the actual possibility of that happening, it's normally something that can say it's hard to quantify.
I think that's where an auditor, an external auditor would also come into play. So say we have, from a security perspective, understood the value of the asset. We have tied, say, vulnerability value to it, a threat value to it. We believe it is high. And then when the question comes as to how often can this happen to us? It has never happened 30 years from now. So I don't think it's something that's important. That kind of shows the management is not very into security, and they lack management commitment. And so the reason why I feel so confident about it is because I've always been backed by the financial audit industries, and we are constantly audited, and there's never a time when you say there's an information security risk and the management doesn't pay attention. So what I would say is that, of course, you should have some external audits also in your company that could enable you to tie that value or that, to the risk that you have projected. So the external audits also help a lot in this. I don't know if that's a common practice here, but.
So what I would add there, Amar, is a trick I've used before. And by the way, I think the more you go up, I think the more you have to be very fact-based. Yes. In most organizations, there's some exceptions, but most organizations, the higher you go, the better those individuals are at processing information and the better they are at detecting BS. And I think that the fact that you don't have good data, you shouldn't sugarcoat it. In fact, so the trick is that answer the question, why haven't we been hacked? Because there's going to be a logical explanation about it. And it could be luck. It could be heroic actions. It could be that you don't have a lot of value in your assets. It could just be that there's no way to monetize it. It could be that your brand is not very controversial, right? It could be that you have great defenses. It could be that you're able to successfully back it up. And the other thing that maybe we can use this to go into the next topic, which is incidence management, is I really like to use incidents strategically. So I always take an incident at L3 and I'll run it as L2. I always take an L2 and I run it as L1. I do it for a bunch of different reasons, not just to make sure the team knows how to do it, is ready for the bigger one, it creates process. But more importantly, is to find those weak signals that tell you your assumptions are still correct. So you might have an assumption to say, we don't have insider threats. Now, and it's very important because you either have evidence that you have, or you don't have evidence. And lack of evidence is evidence. Right? But every time you do an incident, you want to be validating those things. So the incidents that you have over the last year are one of the few things that is very fact-based. And you should then say, and the other thing that's very important on incidents is that I see a lot of mistakes done in incidents where you look at what happened and then you say, this is the worst case scenario. And what you don't do is you don't equate what even luck or lack of skill of an attacker had in that incident. Because I had an analogy to say, look, we lost these AWS keys once, and guess what? The attacker happened to land in one of the few zones that we didn't have a lot of assets. Now you can look at it and going, hey, all nice and good, nothing major happening, but you actually say, no, we got lucky. That person turned right instead of turning left. That person walked into that room and turned on the lights and then left, where they could have done a huge amount of damage. They could have found a huge amount of assets. So I think it's important to take your incidents, then extrapolate the incidents to say, what could have they done with another level of attacker or another level of sophistication, and then say, this is the kind of attacker that we have today. This is what they're doing. And this is, maybe that gives the justification to say, that's why we haven't been that hit. But then you go to the board and saying, realize that you're rolling the dice. Realize that your security model is based on the fact that the attackers that you have, or the business model of the attackers that you have, are today here, here, and here. If they go up, or some of these variables change, then you have a problem.
So I agree on that. That's a nice way of having that communication. But again, like you said, they're very fact-based. Let me give you an example, and this is an example. We're going to acquire a new company. We have 30 acquisitions. We're going to acquire a new company. That company has a cybersecurity risk exposure that it's quite unknown to begin with, right? Before you do your due diligence. Then let's say you figured out the exposure. It's very hard to quantify that, because when I go to stop a merger and acquisition, I'll say, okay, the cybersecurity risk is ABC, we shouldn't acquire them. I can't do that because I don't have the fact base, right?
Yeah.
I've never seen a cybersecurity professional being able to stop a merger and acquisition because we don't have the facts.
I've reduced the sell price though.
Reduce the sell price, yeah, I can see that happening. But
hey, can I have 10% of that amount? Because actually we save the company a lot of money.
But at the same time, we are purchasing to be in the market. We are purchasing for revenue, but we can't quantify that cybersecurity risk on the other side. And I think it would have been nice if we had a database that we can all go and query and what's the actual facts on these exposures, but we don't. And I think the key factor here that Dinis mentioned is that communication and that confidence that you provide to the board, right? You can't go and give them theoretical values. You're going to go with the facts there. You're going to go with what are the actual facts and what's your data behind that. And I do like treating it. We treat, in my previous company, Zava, we treated findings from pen testers as incidents.
Yeah.
And we run them as incidents. So then you actually get to know what the actual exposure, if it wasn't a pen test, is, and how your incident management process works. And I really like that because we treated and fix pen testing findings a lot quicker than registering them as a JIRA and having it as a backlog ticket. Running as an incident, we had teams that basically joined, all the stakeholders, and we have resolution at a quicker pace than we would have otherwise. And then you can use that data to go back to and say, look, this is actually our exposure factor. This is what the impact was or potential was, because this is what the pen tester could do.
Yeah.
It's quantitative versus qualitative risk, right? Yeah, it's the hard numbers versus the objective numbers. And it is hard. I think in some areas you're not going to be able to get hard data that's accurate, and that's an issue that you're going to run into when you're doing risk-based approach to anything. The one thing I wanted to add quickly though was, when you do present to your board, do you ask them to participate in that risk assessment process? So if you get those 10 theoretical risks that are big enough that you want to bring them to the board, do you ask the board how they want to handle treating those risks? Do they want to accept them? Do they want to transfer them? Do they want to mitigate them, et cetera? Because I've found that making those stakeholders responsible for those risks changes the whole game. If all of a sudden I've said, hey, we don't want to spend the investment to fix this theoretical risk that Mario's brought us because we don't have the hard data on it, I have to go to bed at night remembering that I said that we're not going to treat that risk, right? That area is going to just remain risky. And I think that definitely has better impact and buy-in. It depends on your board to some degree, but I've had good luck with involving them in the process to a limited degree on the risk treatment side.
Do you assign them the risk as the owners? I'd be interested.
If I can roll it up, I do actually, because that way, like, so for instance, if one of your board members is a CFO and the risk is a financial fraud risk, I do, because that risk ultimately is going to impact their area more significantly than other areas of the business. And that way you have the particular stakeholders invested, right? You know, you can't always do that depending on your board layout. Like if your board is more advisory based, it's harder to do that. Obviously, I don't know your business, but I do try to assign those risks as I can.
Yeah, I also follow that approach, and I think it really works. So
Yeah.
having a product officer accountable for this, CTO accountable for this, it really helps. Yeah.
You get in fun discussions too. You'll have someone say, I can't have any risk in this area. And they'll say, okay, it costs $100 million to make no risk in your area. And they go, well, we don't have $100 million for that area. And so you get this more like collaborative discussion going up, like what is acceptable? What is that risk tolerance or that risk appetite that the business is willing to accept? And when you get them a little bit more involved in the process, they tend to be more engaged, which helps, because I've run into that too, where you present 10 risks and you just get like a room full of blank stares. They're like, okay, 10 risks, you know? So I've definitely been there. And it depends on the particular board members too, for sure, the personalities. And
so in that case, just one question on that. So who defines the risk appetite, I guess, in that case? Is it the risk owner, or is there kind of a process to define the risk appetite in different areas?
I've always done it in a security steering committee, like something along those lines, where there are some stakeholders involved, but I'm sure there's lots of other opinions.
So what we do, so this, the risk appetite of a company is, of course, decided by the chief financial officer, right? What kind of loss is acceptable to him? And then that goes into the risk department. The risk department then would, of course, translate it for the rest of the teams. And as he rightly said, as Nick rightly said, we would then go to a steering committee with the risk team, the finance team, state the asset, state the amount of risk it has, and tie it to a financial value. So that is the right approach, I would say.
I think a lot of these things are great too if you're in an organization that has the assets and the backing of a steering committee, chief financial officers, security experts all over the place. But a lot of the companies I deal with are small. They don't have a steering committee. They don't really have any of these places. And talking risk to people is sometimes like talking to a blank wall, especially like some of you said, if the board has their mind kind of made up of what they think the risk is or what risk tolerance they're wanting to take. What I found is the best way to just communicate that and approach it is give them, and this requires research, and I get a lot of good information from the Verizon data breach report each year, but find real life examples that happen in your industry, that happen to corporations your size, and reflect those as the risk that you're taking. Because we could all do 100 risk assessments and say, if this is high risk and it will cost us this amount if this happens. But in reality, if you ever Monday morning quarterback that risk amount you valued it at, it's probably not accurate. Because every incident I've ever responded to, I've got to see some great incidents with Secret Service task force and just investigating things in my law enforcement role. They all cost a different amount of money. Each incident that happens, no matter how small, can turn into the biggest incident if not handled properly by the IR team. So I think giving those real life examples and showing them the true cost of what that tiny little risk could amount to is a better example of how I communicate that, because people want to hear in real life how it can impact them. Hey, this scenario happened. This was the same exact vulnerability we haven't patched. It ended up being a $20 million loss. The entire executive board lost their jobs. The CEO was out. Like you tell people these real life stories, they start taking ownership of that risk and what they want to value it at. So it's the same thing with these teams. Give these, and Nick talked about it too, walk them through this process, walk them through the investigative report, what actually happened, what the board did in that situation, what they didn't do, and make them take some sort of ownership. Because at the end of the day, if they're on the steering committee or something like that, I'm going to do everything in my power to document that I gave them the best recommendation I could, and I put the risk out there. And all of that is going to be somewhere in email that you made the decision not to go that route. So,
So you have to.
Can I? Oh, sorry, go on. Final comment from you. No, go on. I want to move to another topic.
I completely agree with you there, Chase. You have to document it so that you have the proof ready that we had presented the risk. So of course, sometimes the company just takes the decision to go ahead with a risky scenario anyways. So, but that's not because I didn't inform them about it, or the security team was not good enough to even identify it. It's because they took that decision based on whatever we have presented to them. So it's even if, like, say, for instance, Mario's, you were talking about them not accepting it. We've done our job. We've documented it. We've signed it. We've explained it to them. They want to accept the risk. Your business. So
yeah, you can't lose sleep over. Can't lose sleep over people making a
Well,
business.
look, our job is make sure that the execs have a clear representation of reality so they can make good business decisions. There's definitely a moment where you have to walk out if you work for a company that is making decisions that you're not comfortable with. So you need to know where personally that line is. But in most cases, the line should be defined by the business. In fact, that's their job. I actually seen a lot of security professionals, including some members from my team. I try to explain to them, don't internalize security. Don't buy the risk on behalf of the business. Make sure the right stakeholders are aware of it. Cool. Let's just change to another topic. And now spot that this most likely, I'm making a calculated guess, that this was not written by a security professional. I understand that shifting left, I understand what shifting left and right means. Instead of making developers aware of security, why not shift right and train security teams to make them aware of development life cycles, which I think is a very fair criticism of security teams.
yeah.
So I can ask you, I will follow that question to you, Dinis, that you're the CTO, right?
Yeah.
You have two roles now.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think that scales? Shifting
No.
right?
No. No, what do you mean? Sorry, what doesn't scale? Sorry, what?
Having the security team understand SDLC are shifting right? So that means that the security team are developers, they understand development, they understand the life cycle. And I'm guessing shifting right will mean that we actually review code on more rather than the tooling, right?
I'm not sure shifting left and right here is the right thing. I think the message is, should the security teams understand what development teams are doing? And I think absolutely. I think there's lots of times where the security teams are part of the problem, and sometimes we don't talk about this. There's lots of examples where sometimes security teams, because they don't understand, they don't have context, they become part of the problem. They introduce roadblocks. They slow down the business. They introduce non-scalable practices. So the reality there is that the security team has to understand development, because he has to understand the best places to do security, right? So that's part of the process. It doesn't scale if security team is reviewing code. Of course not. It doesn't scale that the security team, is doing the work that a developer should be doing. But what scales is to understand how to talk their language, understand where I think security adds value to development. The thing that I found, and I had a good instinct, but I really found very interesting now, is that some of the best engineering changes that we've done was actually driven by security. I have great examples of decisions that we made, of actions that we made, documentation that we created, that some of my original motivation was security, because I wanted to make sure that we had a good picture, but I can clearly connect engineering and business value from those activities.
So I might be fortunate enough to work in companies that the security team actually drives that engineering side. Like I said, we are making the engineering teams understand what they have developed and how the development works. So I've been lucky enough to work in those kind of environments for the last years that I've been a security professional, but that might not be the case everywhere. But from my experience, the security team is actually understanding of the development process. And that's how we are able to influence the engineering side. Without that, we can't influence them. And a conversation I had previously in one of the other talks was, have the development teams choose their own tooling with the guidelines of us, because we understand that they do that job better than us. But we understand the process. We are there to build their guidelines for them. And that to me is actually, again, goes to my question, where's that shift left? Where's the left? So I don't like this terminology, shift left, but I do believe that both teams need to understand how each other's function. Like, taking it away from the technical side, I think security teams are involved in every business process. So understanding how human resources work, understanding how the financials work, I think we need to understand all that. Not that we focus too much on the technology sometimes, and we actually missing the actual business side of the things, all the other departments.
Yeah. Well, and can I bring you here? Because I think we talked about this before, right? Where the security team, when you think about it, is one of the unique, is in a unique place in the organization, because we are one of the few teams that can speak to everybody. We're one of the few teams that have a mandate and the power to speak all the way from the board, all the way to every single team. Because I've seen lots of times where a team A doesn't want to talk to team B for sorts of reasons. Security, and even when we build security champions, what we actually have done is we created a horizontal team across the company that sometimes doesn't exist.
Yeah, the only question is how to utilize on that, right? But I mean, it's a fact, right? We cross-cut the whole org, right? They work with HR, with finance, with legal, with privacy, with go from the board, as you said, to like onboarding. Yeah, the only department that does that, right? The only function, and the only thing is, how do you then use that? How do you utilize that to strengthen your kind of relationship and partnership with different things and improve engineering, improve HR? I mean, we can improve loads of things, right, across the board. But you depend a lot there on the org as well, right? As I was saying earlier, I mean, every org is different. So as Marius was saying, maybe he was lucky that he was working in organizations where these things work. There are organizations where nothing works, right? But we still need to make it work for ourselves, right? So I think, yeah, you need to be very pragmatic about these things and prioritize brutally things that are most important for you, right? And then start there. Otherwise, but in example, at Skyscanner, when we started our journey in sort of gamification and having that closed loop of automated kind of education and awareness based on data we collected, like, and all of that was basically initial kind of gap analysis and assessment when we were brainstorming what should be done in that sense, revealed a lot of gaps on the engineering side and just fundamental kind of flaws that we had to go and fix. We were lacking a lot of single sources of truth for certain things that you can rely on, etc., etc. So it's a bit of lobbying. It's a bit of okay, you hire 3-4 people and you build it yourself, right? But it's about, you need to sell that in a way where it is for the overall benefit of the organization, right? It's not something just for us, because later, as we spoke, Dinis, I mean, everyone will plug into it, right? They want to track
That's
costs.
a good thing,
These
right?
guys want to track that. These guys want, and they all see benefits in it. But before it's actually there, it's very hard to see that.
But that's real value, right, for the business, right? So, look, my argument here is I think in the medium term, the CISO deserves a seat at the board, not because of security. Because ultimately, when the CISO teams and the security teams do the security job well, then security actually become less of a risk, unless the whole thing is on fire, and then you do need to have there. But I do believe it needs to sit in the board because it's that unique place, because it's the few entities that can actually provide a huge amount of data, a huge amount of real information. Because I bet, Ant, if you connected the analysis that you've done of your healthy teams from a security point of view and the unhealthy teams, and you correlated to the teams that were unhealthy from a business point of view, there would almost be a one-to-one mapping. The teams that were struggling with some of your practices were also the teams that probably were struggling to deliver business value.
And I think too, because of what you guys mentioned, the security team touches everything in most companies. If you have it set up properly and have security on board from the beginning, they are the one group in your organization that can give you an honest opinion about what works and what doesn't work. Because I've seen working with government agencies or that, I've been part of project management, networking, system admin. I see what works and what doesn't work. So having the CISO on the board and having a seat there is your one chance of having that honest opinion about, okay, what is working right now, or this is working, but what's the problems with it? What could be done better? And that's the one position I think has the insight into that.
Well, how many times have you been in a project where you look at a team and you look what they're going to do, and you can say, this is not going to work? I can already give you 5 reasons where that team is not going to deliver that. It's going to be a cluster F, right? And then guess what? 5 months later, a year later, it was, right?
Yep.
So, but we have I think what we have is we have a very pragmatic approach to this. Also, because we are the first responders. Remember that we are the first ones that have to turn up when stuff happens. And the worse those environments are, the worse our job is. And the final point I want to make here, I'm not advocating for massive security teams. In fact, the smaller the team, the better. In fact, Ant, one of the things we said last time we met was, I loved, was you said the job of security is to simplify the organization. And I think that is so spot on. But sometimes we do need to grow to do the transformation. But the whole point is to empower the business to do it themselves and actually simplify the business, which for us, we can measure that because we can actually see that in our environment.
Yeah, I completely agree with you there, Dinis. It's our aim is to make sure that it's not us who's securing the organization, it's the employees who are actually doing their part in each area, in each department.
Cool. Right, just on the hour, any final comments? This was great. Thanks everybody. Maybe just go around the room. Final thoughts. I think I already said quite a lot. So Marius, final thought from you?
Final thought for me is great discussion. So thank you everyone for the great input. I think we can talk for hours here when it comes to these things. I will leave you with a remark that it's all a risk assessment process. That's it. Just leave it there.
Good. What's the next? Final thoughts?
Sure.
Yeah.
Oh.
All at once.
Go ahead, Nick.
Thanks. Yeah, thank you for inviting me. I think it was a really good session, and I think I agree with Marius. It's kind of all based on risk, right? Our whole career and our whole position is really to quantify and hopefully minimize risk, and so I agree with that theme, and I'll just leave it at that.
I agree with all that. Thank you everyone for your time. I think one of the last final things is just that we could all take away is just try to communicate from the beginning, communicate why you want something done, what the benefit and the risk is from the early stages. And I think that will save you in the long run. If you just communicate with the other teams out there, the whole organization, you got to work as a team, no matter if you're security, networking, systems, PMO. So.
Boom. Sita, you want to have a word?
Yes, I also agree with the team here. Security is, of course, a risk, and our work is all about that risk assessment and risk management. And I also completely agree with you there, Chase, when you talked about communication, because it is so important for security individuals to be able to communicate to the board, to your peers, to the teams, to employees, and to communicate what you do, why you do it. So you have to keep communicating. You have to make sure the team understands your value and why you do it. And I think that's an area I was not very good in, and I learned over time that I need to communicate. I need to communicate more. So completely agree on that.
Thank you. And the final words.
No final words. I would love to chat more. I mean, we should talk to each other more frequently, right? We always you remember things I said, we speak once every 2 years, right? I mean, I don't remember saying that, but I mean, we should talk more often to each other. We can learn a lot from each other, and we don't do that often. This 1 hour is cool, right? But we can. There's nothing stopping us from doing this. I don't know, every 2 weeks, every 4 weeks, but just pick a topic to do a kind of a workshop, do something. But there's tons and tons of things where I have a feeling we always talk about similar things and keep having same challenges, right? But it would be good to really try and, I don't know, bring people together more often and just
Well, we
do
can organize
exactly this
more of
Yeah.
these sessions. Well, first of all, the summit happens every 2 months, but we can totally do further sessions.
Yeah, but we could also make it more practical, right? I mean, I
Yeah.
don't know. I would love to see what do you take to the board, right? Show me the slides you take to the board. I'll show you mine. Does it make sense? What's the difference? How do you reverse engineer what the board wants to see? How do you scale certain things internally? How do you can make it very practical and tangible where you learn, right? Because it's very hard to learn these things at the job, right? So it's easier to learn it from other practitioners.
So, Anne, can I count on you to organize the next couple of sessions on those
No,
topics?
you'll organize that as usual. So we are all counting on you. We're all counting on you, mate.
We're all in, but you need to organize it, Dennis.
Fair enough. I know Anne does like that. We did once with the summit. He goes, "Come with great ideas." I go, "Cool, hey, you're gonna join it? I know you do it. I'll turn up." But then he adds amazing value. So, all good stuff. Brilliant. Well, thanks everybody, and I'll see you at the next summit. We'll definitely do more. And there's some great sessions. Like share with your teams. I definitely feel that this summit, the team is automation as code and automation and scaling up. So there's some really cool sessions. And thanks for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Bye.
Thank you all.
Thanks for the
Cheers. Bye bye.